I am going to have to take a shovel. I'm going to shovel my way out to the gate, because that makes sense. I'm going to leave the tomatoes under the cover this morning, at least. If we get really sunny this afternoon, which we're not supposed to be, I will take them out. Other than that, nope. It's super windy today, and I know it's kicking up the dust, so my allergies are also kicking up a little bit. Okay, so we use Johnny's Select Seeds in Maine, Hoss Tools in Georgia, and then we also use Totally Tomatoes, and we have some self-saved seeds too. When I look at my tomatoes, because I'm going to start with tomatoes, we'll go to peppers and husk cherries later. When I look at my tomatoes, what am I looking for? I'm looking for what sort of tomato they are. Are they a paste tomato, which, by the way, doesn't mean you're making paste. You may just want them for tomato sauce or anything. What it means is that they're meatier and that you have to boil away less liquid in order to get good tomato sauce with them. And you'll hear several types mentioned. You'll hear San Marzano, you'll hear Roma. Those are the two prime ones. And sort of mixes of those sort of things. So from Johnny's, we have two indeterminate varieties that we're going to be growing. Granadero and Big Beef. Granadero is a paste tomato, and Big Beef is a beef steak tomato. In our case, we have multiple things to decide besides that. I'm always paying attention, and I have a little I next to anything that's an indeterminate, and I have a D next to anything that's a determinate. Now, what's the difference between an indeterminate and a determinate? A determinate only grows so tall. Now, how tall that is depends on the individual plant variety. There are plants, for instance, which are designed to be grown in pots that might only get to be 18 inches, 2 feet tall. You need to read the descriptions of the plants before you buy them. Otherwise, you could be surprised to find this big sprawly plant there when you thought you were getting something that was going to be nice and short and chubby. Determinate varieties can, as I say, grow to greatly different heights. The ones that we grew last year, which were from Hoss Tools mostly, we grew Invincible, which is a paste tomato, and we grew Bella Rosa. And we were very, very pleased with those, and we will be growing them again. They grew about 3 feet tall. I hear from places, some places other than where we live, that some places they will grow taller than that. Okay? Our tomatoes are all in raised beds or in the greenhouse. Now, if they are in the greenhouse, they are in hydroponics. And generally speaking, most of what we grow in the greenhouse is indeterminate because we can allow the plants to grow as tall as the greenhouse and then do drop and lean so that we can still reach the stems, and we have this whole system that's part of the greenhouse series. But in the yard, we have been switching back and forth is the best way to say it, trying to determine what worked best for us. In the past, the vast majority of tomato plants that we grew were indeterminate, because a significant percentage of the open pollinated heirloom tomatoes were historically indeterminate. That means they grow from the spring and they keep growing and growing and growing, and they grow until they freeze to death in the fall or you rip them out, whichever happens first. Whereas the determinate plants will only get so high and then they stop. And they focused all of their energy on their fruit. Now, 6 1/2 does it the other. Some people like it one way, some people like it the other way. We usually do a mix because it works for us. We only grow one cherry tomato, And that is Gardener's Delight, which we get from Totally Tomatoes. We have been growing Gardener's Delight for probably, I wouldn't guess, at least 6 or 7 years. They are incredibly fruitful. They just, I mean, at the end of the season, this past season, we had plants that were just covered with trusses of tomatoes. A truss of tomatoes is kind of like with grapes, they come in a bunch, kind of. It's the same sort of a thing. You get this line of tomatoes. We just, we brought some in green. We ripened them in the kitchen. I mean, there's just no end to what Gardener's Delight will do in terms of cherry, and we really like their flavor. They have what I call a big tomato flavor. I don't know if you've ever been someplace and you see these cherry tomatoes, and gosh, they look delicious, and you taste them, and they're either tasteless or they have kind of a funny, weird taste to them. Gardener's Delight tastes like a big tomato, except it's teeny, and it's great in salads and stuff like that. A wonderful thing. And if we have way too many, I simply run them through the juicer along with the other tomatoes when I'm doing tomato sauce. Nothing lost, because they have that big tomato flavor, so you're not diluting your flavor of your tomato sauce in any way. So what are we growing? Let's see. Everything that we're growing from House Tools this year is a determinant. We have Invincible, which we grew last year, which is a paste tomato. We have Bella Rosa, which we grew last year, which is a sort of a slicer, but it's very meaty, and I have no compunctions about throwing that in with the sauce tomatoes if I need to. We're adding a couple more. They highly recommended Tachi as a very productive, and I've heard this from a bunch of people who've used it, a very, very productive paste tomato. It's hard to believe that anything could be more productive than Invincible, but we'll see. We're going to try it. They also have a new one that they're calling Shelby. It also has a number associated with it, but that's because when you work on hybrid varieties and stuff like that, they start out with numbers, and then you could name them later if you want to, but they have a basic number that leads you back to the person, or the company rather, that hybridized them. Shelby is supposed to be a San Marzano type, so again, it's a paste tomato, and we're going to give it a try. The new one that we're doing from the other new one that we're doing from House Tools this year is the Hossinator, which is supposed to be a beefsteak tiled tomato. So we'll see. We'll see. The current plan is that the varieties from Johnny's, the Granadero and the Big Beef, will both go into the greenhouse because we know that they both do well in the greenhouse. Every year we try a couple, I'll just say a couple, new varieties in the green. Oh, I get the hiccups now. Every year we do a couple of new varieties in the greenhouse to see how they work there, because not everything likes being grown in hydroponics. And even some varieties which were recommended to us as hydroponic tomatoes didn't work out for us. It turned out they required a much more climate-controlled environment than we can provide here. I'm sorry, when it's 95 degrees outside, it's not going to be less than 95 degrees in my greenhouse. It just isn't going to be. Because with all that solar gain from the greenhouse, if you didn't run the fans and the coolers, it would probably be 120 or 130 in there, which is not good for anything. We could probably we try and keep it down under 90, but sometimes you just can't. You just can't. And sometimes it means you get blossom drop and stuff like that in there, but we always choose tomatoes that we know will come back. So the other tomato that will definitely go into the greenhouse is Amanda Orange. That is a self-saved seed. It was gifted to us several years ago by CB of CB's Garden Greenhouse, or Greenhouse and Garden. Henry will get that right. Anyways, I just think of him as CB because we talk with him all the time. He's a great guy. And he gave us a whole stack of seeds. And the one that we really stuck with was Amanda Orange. It is an orange beefsteak style, open pollinated. And It's pretty darn amazing. It really is. I have never been a fan of what I call colored tomatoes. In other words, you won't see me growing various kinds of stripes and this and that and the other thing. My brain wants tomatoes to be red. Okay? I make an exception for Amanda Orange. It is a beefsteak. It is orange. So at the beginning of the season, I always have to remind myself, this tomato will never turn red. It might turn black and fuzzy if I left it long enough, but it's never going to turn red. It will turn orange, and then you have to start checking it to see when it's ripe. And it makes the most wonderful BLTs and tomato sandwiches. Big slicer tomatoes that are just magnificent. It is susceptible to blight, so we put it the closest to the door, because our wind goes from farthest from the door to closest to the door because of both the prevailing winds in our area and also the way we have our fans set up and our cooler. We use a swamp cooler, also known as a swamp cooler, also known as a, wow, brain just fell out. Evaporative cooler, evaporative cooler, evaporative cooler. In the greenhouse, which does put extra moisture into the air, which is great, and it also creates a major push of air from the south end to the north end of the greenhouse. Then we have an exhaust fan at the north end of the greenhouse, which pulls out air from there. So our predominant flow is from the south to the north, and we put the most susceptible to blight plants closest to that exhaust fan, so that when they get blight, because they will, it's just a matter of time, they will be closest to the door so that the blight spores are not wandering around the greenhouse as much. We tried it last year and it worked. So it's not broken, we're not going to fix it. What else are we thinking about growing in terms of tomatoes? Well, there's two that I really haven't completely decided on. And remember, I haven't talked about quantities because I haven't worked that out yet. I know that my Granadero and Big Beef and Gardener's Delight and Amanda Orange are all going to have some in the greenhouse. Last year, we grew one bed in the garden of determinate tomatoes and one bed of indeterminate tomatoes. I'm not going to be growing Amanda Orange in the garden this year because it just didn't do all that well. It was too fragile for our environment, but it works great in the greenhouse, so we'll keep it there. The Gardener's Delight, I may not grow that in the garden either. There's a piece of me that they're big sprawly plants, and it works great in the greenhouse because I can trellis them up on strings with clips and all that kind of stuff, the way you do with a greenhouse, and keep it very tidy and see if there's anything going on and all that kind of stuff. The minute I move those out into the garden, I'm dealing with trying to crawl around in a plant to find bugs and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that we really got that great a harvest out of it last year to make it worthwhile in the garden. Huge harvest in the greenhouse. So I'm thinking Gardener's Delight will probably be only in the greenhouse. Last summer, we did the Bella Rosa and Invincible, which are both determinants, in one bed, and we also had a couple of experimental ones, Grand Marshal and Wisconsin 55. Now, those are both totally tomatoes varieties. Grand Marshal is a determinant, so that was in with the determinants, and Wisconsin 55 was an indeterminate, so that went in with the indeterminates. I haven't decided if I'm going to plant either of those yet. I have the seeds, and that's just a matter of anguishing. It's important to anguish at least a little bit about this. My friends who are heavy-duty gardeners will think that's funny. You know, you're always making these bets as to what's going to work and what's not going to work. You're looking at the weather forecasts. You're trying to figure out what you have for space, where you can plant different things, what's likely to work, what's not likely to work. We'll see. One of the beds that usually is available for beans or tomatoes or anything else we want to plant in it is full of garlic. We will see how that works as the spring goes on. We've had trouble keeping them watered enough this winter. We'll see. All that garlic was harvested out of our previous garlic bed. I would love it if it would just go crazy and do really well this spring, and I have no way of guessing whether it's going to or not. We had to get that garlic out of that garlic bed because it was too overcrowded. It wasn't producing well anymore, and it was just requiring water, and the only thing we were getting out of it was scapes in the spring, which is that center spike that you get out of a garlic plant when it wants to go to flower. And scapes are delicious, but it wasn't worth an entire bed. So we had to decide what we were doing there. So that's about what we're doing with tomatoes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 different types for sure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 are paste tomatoes. Then there's a couple of Beefmaster beefsteak type tomatoes, 1 cherry tomato. So that's the basic layout for us.